The human delegation returned to Earth carrying the weight of what had transpired on Zithra. Whiskers, blissfully ignorant of the devastation she had caused, prowled the cabin of their ship with the air of a queen surveying her domain. She had become a symbol of unchecked chaos, a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations were vulnerable to the unpredictable nature of life itself. Eliza Moreau sat alone in her quarters, replaying the events in her mind. There was no precedent for what had happened, no handbook for dealing with the aftermath of an entire world's destruction caused by something as innocuous as a domestic cat. Reports of the disaster had already reached Earth's leadership, and the reception was as dire as expected. The Zytherians had issued a formal condemnation of humanity, blaming them for their planet's downfall. Reparations were demanded, though no amount of compensation could ever restore what had been lost. Whiskers, however, had become an unlikely celebrity. News of her exploits spread rapidly, and the media latched onto the story with morbid fascination. Headlines ranged from "the cat that toppled a civilization" to "feline fury, how one pet changed the galaxy." Whiskers' face was plastered across every screen, her wide eyes and innocent expression a cruel contrast to the destruction she had left in her wake. But not everyone saw her as a villain. On Earth, a growing faction of scientists and philosophers argued that Whiskers was not to blame. They saw her actions as a case study in unintended consequences, a cautionary tale about the arrogance of assuming complete control over one's environment. Whiskers had merely acted according to her nature. It was the Zytherians, and humanity by extension, who had failed to account for the chaos of the unknown. Amid the public debate, Eliza found herself summoned to an emergency council meeting at the United Earth Alliance headquarters. The chamber was packed with diplomats, military leaders, and scientists, all speaking in urgent tones. The agenda was clear: how to prevent another Whiskers incident. Eliza stood at the podium, addressing the room with the calm resolve she was known for. "The events on Zithra were a tragedy," she began, her voice steady. "But they were also a lesson. Whiskers was not a weapon, nor a saboteur. She was a cat, a creature driven by curiosity and instinct. The fault lies not with her, but with us, for underestimating the power of the smallest things." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement and dissent. Some argued for stricter protocols regarding the transportation of Earth's fauna to other planets. Others called for an outright ban, citing the potential for further disasters. A few, however, suggested that Whiskers' actions had revealed vulnerabilities in Zytherian technology that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Perhaps, they argued, this catastrophe could be a turning point, a chance to build stronger, more resilient systems. As the debates raged on, Whiskers remained oblivious to the turmoil she had caused. She had been relocated to a secure facility, where she lived in luxurious isolation under the care of a team of biologists. Her every move was monitored and studied, not just for the sake of understanding her behavior, but also for insights into how Earth's fauna might interact with alien ecosystems in the future. But Whiskers' story was far from over. Months after the Zithra incident, reports began to surface of strange phenomena occurring on other worlds. Planets that had once been paragons of order and stability were experiencing sudden and inexplicable breakdowns. Power grids were failing, ecosystems were spiraling out of control, and entire cities were being evacuated. At first, these events were dismissed as unrelated coincidences. But as the incidents multiplied, a pattern began to emerge. Each of the affected planets had, at some point, hosted a diplomatic delegation from Earth. Eliza, now deeply involved in the investigation, pieced together the clues with growing unease. On each of these missions, an Earth animal, often brought as a gesture of goodwill or a token of cultural exchange, had been involved. A dog that had accidentally activated a terraforming device. A parrot that had mimicked critical security codes, causing system overrides. Even a goldfish, inadvertently introduced into an alien water supply, had disrupted an entire aquatic ecosystem. The incidents were eerily similar to what had happened with Whiskers, though on smaller scales. It became clear that Whiskers had been the first in a series of unintended disasters, a harbinger of what was now being called the fauna factor. Earth's animals, so ordinary and harmless in their natural environment, were proving to be agents of chaos when introduced to alien worlds. The implications were staggering. Humanity's role in the galaxy was being redefined, not as conquerors or saviors, but as bearers of chaos in the form of their simplest creatures. Diplomatic relations with other civilizations grew tense, and Earth was forced to reconsider its approach to interstellar engagement. Strict regulations were imposed on the transport of animals, and new technologies were developed to predict and mitigate their potential impact on alien systems. But for Eliza, the question lingered. Was this truly a flaw of Earth's creatures, or a reminder of the universe's inherent unpredictability? Whiskers, with her innocent curiosity, had exposed the fragility of even the most advanced civilizations. She had reminded them all that life, in its rawest form, was uncontrollable. Years later, when the Zytherians began to rebuild their society on a distant moon, they erected a monument to their fallen world. At its center stood a statue of Whiskers, her form rendered in polished stone, her eyes gazing forward as if surveying a vast and unknowable future. To some, it was a symbol of devastation. To others, a testament to resilience. And on Earth, Whiskers remained a living legend. Her legacy had sparked a new era of intergalactic humility and caution. She was no longer just a cat. She was a force of nature, a reminder of the delicate balance that existed between curiosity and destruction. Eliza, now retired, visited Whiskers in her sanctuary one final time. The cat, older but no less spirited, purred as Eliza scratched behind her ears. "You changed everything," Eliza whispered, her voice tinged with both reverence and sorrow. "And maybe that's exactly what we needed." Whiskers yawned and stretched, her tail curling lazily. To her, it was just another day. But for the galaxy, it was a future forever altered by the smallest, most unlikely catalyst, a pet cat named Whiskers. The chaos on Zythera escalated faster than anyone could have anticipated. Whiskers had become an unstoppable force of disruption, and despite her small size, her presence loomed large over the alien civilization. As systems failed and panic spread, it became clear that this was no longer a simple diplomatic mishap. Whiskers, with her boundless curiosity and feline agility, was systematically unraveling the threads of Zytherian society, one unintended pawswipe at a time. Her next target was the Hall of Balance, a vast chamber filled with hovering spheres that maintained the planet's gravitational equilibrium. To the Zytherians, this chamber was sacred, a physical representation of the harmony they had cultivated over centuries. To Whiskers, it was a playground. The cat had slipped past the frantic guards, drawn by the flickering lights and gentle hum of the spheres. Her tail swished as she crouched, her eyes narrowing in predatory focus. Then, with a sudden leap, she pounced on one of the spheres, sending it spinning wildly out of its designated orbit. Alarms blared as technicians rushed to stabilize the system, but Whiskers was already bounding toward her next target. The Zytherians were now in full crisis mode. Emergency councils were convened, their discussions frantic and disjointed. Leaders demanded answers. How could such a small creature cause so much devastation? Why had the humans brought this menace to their world? The human delegation, led by Eliza, could only watch in growing horror as their warnings about Whiskers' unpredictable nature proved woefully insufficient. Attempts to capture the cat were futile. Zytherian drones, equipped with advanced tracking systems, were dispatched to apprehend her, but Whiskers evaded them with ease. She darted through corridors, squeezing into vents and crevices too small for the drones to follow. When cornered, she would lash out with her claws, slicing through delicate machinery as if it were paper. Her ability to adapt and survive was astonishing, and the Zytherians began to suspect that this Earth creature was far more dangerous than it appeared. Meanwhile, Whisker's path of destruction continued unabated. In the bioresearch wing, she discovered a collection of rare and exotic plants, carefully cultivated to sustain Zythera's unique ecosystem. The plants emitted pheromones that influenced the planet's native wildlife, ensuring balance and stability. Whiskers, fascinated by the vibrant colors and unusual scents, began batting at the plants, tearing leaves and scattering seeds across the sterile lab. The resulting chemical reactions triggered a chain of events that sent the local fauna into a frenzy. Animals that had coexisted peacefully for generations suddenly turned aggressive, spreading chaos across the capital. The Zytherians tried to adapt, deploying containment teams to mitigate the damage. But as fast as they worked, Whiskers moved faster. In the energy exchange hub, she toppled a row of crystalline batteries, causing a surge that overloaded the city's power grid. In the knowledge repository, she dislodged a series of data crystals, erasing centuries of recorded history in a single playful swipe. The planet's most advanced systems, designed to withstand cosmic storms and enemy invasions, were no match for a determined Earth feline. Fear began to take hold. Zytherian citizens, who had once admired Whiskers as an exotic curiosity, now viewed her as a harbinger of doom. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed she was a weapon sent by the humans, a test of their civilization's resilience. Others whispered that she was a god in feline form, punishing them for their arrogance. Statues of Whiskers began appearing in the streets, hastily erected by those desperate to appease her perceived wrath. As the Zytherians debated their next move, Whiskers found her way to the Nexus core, the beating heart of Zythera's planetary systems. The chamber was a marvel of engineering, its walls lined with pulsating conduits, and its floor glowing with a radiant energy field. At its center stood the core itself, a towering structure of crystalline lattices that housed the planet's energy matrix. It was a place of awe and reverence, a symbol of Zythera's unparalleled technological prowess. Whiskers, of course, saw none of this. To her, the core was simply a new place to explore. She prowled around the chamber, her movements graceful and deliberate. Technicians scrambled to keep her away from the sensitive equipment, but she slipped past them with ease. Her claws clicked against the floor as she approached the core, her eyes reflecting the brilliant light it emitted. It was then that the unthinkable happened. Whiskers, in her endless curiosity, leapt onto the core's main control console. Her paws pressed against the touch-sensitive interface, activating commands and bypassing security protocols with an efficiency that would have impressed even the most skilled hacker. The core began to pulsate erratically, its once harmonious rhythms disrupted by her unintentional inputs. Panic erupted in the chamber. Zytherian engineers shouted over one another, their voices drowned out by the escalating alarms. Eliza and Jansen, who had finally arrived in an attempt to intervene, watched in stunned silence as Whiskers triggered a cascading system failure. Energy levels spiked dangerously, and the chamber was bathed in a blinding light. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then, with a deafening roar, the core unleashed a surge of energy that rippled through the planet's infrastructure. Systems failed en masse, and the once thriving city was plunged into darkness. Above ground, the sky turned a sickly shade of red as the planet's environmental controls began to falter. Whiskers, oblivious to the chaos she had wrought, sat atop the core, licking her paw with an air of nonchalance. The Zytherians were faced with an impossible decision. Their efforts to contain the crisis had failed, and the planet was on the brink of collapse. Evacuations were ordered, and massive ships began ferrying citizens off-world. In the council chambers, leaders debated whether to destroy the Nexus core in a desperate bid to stabilize the planet, but the risk of total annihilation was too great. Their once unshakable confidence in their technological superiority had been shattered by a creature no larger than a child's toy. as Whiskers finally allowed herself to be retrieved by Jansen. Now thoroughly disheveled and frantic, the Zytherians looked on with a mixture of relief and bitterness. Their world was falling apart, and they had no choice but to abandon it. Whiskers, still purring contentedly in Jansen's arms, seemed utterly unrepentant. The evacuation ships lifted off as the planet's surface began to crack and heave. From orbit, the Zytherians watched in stunned silence as their beloved Zythera, the crown jewel of their civilization, descended into chaos. The core's unstable energy finally detonated, sending shockwaves across the system. What had once been a beacon of progress was now a lifeless husk. Whiskers, nestled safely aboard the human ship, yawned and stretched, her tail flicking lazily. For her, it had been just another day. For Zythera, it was the end of everything. The alien council chamber was vast and overwhelming, a testament to technological prowess and intergalactic power. Seated around the crescent-shaped table were representatives from dozens of species, each more bizarre and awe-inspiring than the last. Towering figures, with crystalline skin shimmered under artificial light, while gelatinous beings shifted and pulsed in translucent containment suits. The room hummed with an air of barely restrained tension as the human representative, a middle-aged diplomat named Dr. Eliza Moreau, stepped forward to address them. Her presence was unassuming compared to the grandeur of her audience, but the weight of her tale demanded attention. Why do humans fear cats? The question had been posed with thinly veiled incredulity by a Skevran envoy, a wiry being with multifaceted eyes and a voice like the scraping of metal. You speak of them with reverence and dread, yet they are but small terrestrial creatures. Explain. Eliza hesitated for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the room. These beings, conquerors of galaxies, wielders of unimaginable technologies, could not grasp the paradox of Earth's most enigmatic predators. She took a deep breath, steadied her voice, and began. It happened 5 years ago on Zythera, she said. The name sent ripples of recognition through the council. Zythera, the jewel of Sector 14, an advanced civilization renowned for its unshakable order and technological supremacy. It was a name that now carried an unspoken tragedy. Eliza continued, her tone grave. It began innocently enough, as most calamities do. A diplomatic mission, a simple gesture of goodwill. And a cat. Her words hung in the air, and some of the delegates exchanged confused glances. Others leaned forward, intrigued. Eliza pressed on. The cat's name was Whiskers. She belonged to a fellow diplomat, Ambassador Jansen, who had a peculiar fondness for his pet. He claimed the cat brought him comfort, even amidst the stress of navigating interstellar politics. At first, no one questioned the decision to bring her along. Zythera was a peaceful world, its inhabitants proud yet hospitable. Who could have foreseen the disaster that was about to unfold? Eliza's voice softened as she painted the scene. Zythera's capital city was a marvel of design, a fusion of nature and technology where towering spires intertwined with bioluminescent flora. Whiskers, nestled comfortably in Jansen's arms, seemed out of place amidst the grandeur, a tiny, unimposing creature with silken fur and wide, curious eyes. The Zytherians, a humanoid species with azure skin and delicate, vine-like tendrils adorning their heads, greeted the Earth delegation with warm smiles. They marveled at Whiskers, mistaking her for a rare Earth creature of great significance. Jansen, ever eager to impress, allowed Whiskers to roam freely within the palace grounds. The cat's initial explorations were benign. She pawed at shimmering fountains, stalked alien insects with predatory focus, and napped in patches of Zytherian sunlight. The locals found her charming, even endearing. They had no idea what she was capable of. The first incident, Eliza said, was dismissed as a harmless mishap. Whiskers had wandered into the palace's energy monitoring chamber, a labyrinth of crystalline conduits and pulsing nodes. She leapt onto one of the consoles, her tail brushing against a control panel. A power surge rippled through the system, causing momentary blackouts across the city. The Zytherians laughed it off, calling it a quirk of Earth's sacred animal. But it was only the beginning. Eliza's tone darkened. Whiskers, emboldened by the lack of boundaries, ventured deeper into the palace. Her curiosity led her into places even the Zytherians rarely tread. Labs housing experimental technologies, chambers containing volatile energy cores. Wherever she went, chaos followed. A containment field faltered as Whiskers playfully batted at its controls, releasing a harmless but startling display of plasma that sent scientists fleeing. An archive of holographic records was partially erased when she nibbled on a fiber optic cable. Despite these incidents, the Zytherians remained amused. To them, Whiskers was an embodiment of human eccentricity, a living enigma from a planet known for its oddities. Jansen, meanwhile, was oblivious to the mounting unease within his own delegation. Eliza had tried to warn him, tried to explain that Whiskers was not a creature to be underestimated. But Jansen waved her off, insisting that his beloved pet could do no harm. Then came the turning point, Eliza said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Whiskers found her way into the core nexus. A hush fell over the chamber. The core nexus was the heart of Zithra, a sprawling subterranean complex that regulated the planet's energy flow and maintained its delicate environmental balance. Even the Zytherians approached it with reverence, knowing that a single malfunction could spell catastrophe. For Whiskers, it was just another playground. Eliza described the scene in vivid detail. Whiskers padding softly through the labyrinthine halls, her sharp eyes gleaming in the dim light. She leapt onto a control dais, her paws pressing against untranslatable glyphs. Warning sirens blared, and technicians scrambled to regain control. But it was too late. The cat's accidental meddling had initiated a chain reaction, destabilizing the energy matrix. Panic erupted. The Zytherians, now fully aware of the threat, mobilized every resource to contain the crisis. Emergency protocols were enacted, but Whiskers, spooked by the commotion, darted deeper into the nexus, evading every attempt to capture her. Her movements, random and instinctual, wreaked further havoc on the already fragile system. Eliza paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. The delegates were riveted, their disbelief giving way to a dawning realization. What she described was not merely an accident, but a calamity born of hubris, a failure to understand the unpredictable nature of a creature they had dismissed as trivial. The Zytherians, Eliza said, her voice steady, called her an omen of destruction, a harbinger of chaos. But to us, she was just a cat, a creature of instinct, curiosity, and yes, mischief. We underestimated her. We all did. She took a step back, her gaze unwavering. That was how it began, and how Zithra's fate was sealed. The chamber fell silent. Eliza could feel the weight of their collective judgment, their questions and doubts. But she also saw something else, the spark of understanding, the recognition that even the smallest things could hold unimaginable power. And her story was far from over.